Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Joy Davis. I'm the Director of Communications, Community, and Web at CSI, and I am so delighted to be hosting this webinar today. Today we're going to hear good advice for guide specifications from two people that I know are experts in the subject. We are joined today by Nina Giglio and Mike Chambers. Both are fellows of CSI and certified construction specifiers. They are exactly the people you look for if you're trying to get guide specifications written. Nina is president of Hall Building Information Group, a consulting firm based in Charlotte, North Carolina. And Mike is the principal architect at MCS Specifications, a product marketing consultancy in California. Both Mike and Nina serve as reviewers for CSI's Compliant Document Review Program, which they're going to tell you a little bit about later on today. I am very personally happy to have them here to do this presentation because in addition to being a couple of my favorite speakers in the entire Institute, they have both told me on occasion how much they appreciate the product reps they work with and how much support they get from them. So Nina, Mike, anything you want to add?
No, that sounds great. Let's go for it.
Okay, well, I'm going to warn our audience, or at least encourage them to participate. If you are tweeting, please include the hashtag #TrustCSI, which you can see on the lower right-hand corner of the slide right now. Having said all that, shall we get started, guys?
Yeah, let's move on to the next slide. Our learning objectives today are multitudinous and many. But the bottom line is we want to talk really about two key things today. One is the tips for good guide specs, and then as the first objective says, to explore the CDR program and how it might work for you.
First off, let's go on and just talk about guide specifications. As I think there are a lot of guide specifications that manufacturers produce out there, and there are commercially available products or guide specification products as well, such as RCOM, BSD, that kind of run the gamut. But what we're really going to be talking about is good specification writing, and as manufacturers, which I think a lot of our audience today are representative of manufacturers, is why
do we lose
you
Nina?
want your...
Oh.
No, I'm still here.
Okay.
Sorry, but one of the reasons that we want to deal with this is manufacturers' guide specs and what provides a good specifications. One of the things that our firm does is prepare project specifications in addition to manufacturers' guide specifications. And so when I am preparing a manufacturer's guide specifications, I look at how I would want the information to be provided to me in a usable format for putting it into a project. Mike, do you have anything you want to add about tips for guide specifications at the moment?
No, I think let's go ahead and move on to the next slide, but I do want to underscore what Nina said. Guide specifications are critical. And as a specifier like Nina writing project specifications, we count on those, because if we're not familiar with a product or a project, that's where the first place we're going to go to look and see. So our first tip is to stay current and make sure that you are using the latest version of master format. As you may or may not know, and get more information off their website reference there, master format is consistently being updated. The first version was 2004, and I believe in 2009 or 10, I can't recall, they started coming up with annual updates. So very important to make sure that you are working with the most current version of master format. Nina?
Well, with that being said, I think to highlight a couple of those bullet items on the right is when I pull a guide spec off of a manufacturer's website and it's got a 5-digit number, it right away alerts me that, man, this manufacturer may not be using the current industry standards, and if they aren't using good current industry standards for just numbering their specification section, how current is the information that's in the body? So I mean, that right off the bat is an alert to me that they may not be current with good practices for specifications writing. And master format oftentimes is confused. Ultimately, master format is just a list of numbers and titles. And with that being said, there's really no content in the master format book, and oftentimes manufacturers will contact CSI and say, you know, I need a number for my product. Well, there may already be an assigned number and title, and master format is arranged according to work results, which are common practices. It's not just a product that's listed, it's also the installation, and that's what makes up a work result. Well, there are, and I can't tell you how many exact numbers have been assigned, there are a lot of areas where the master format expansion team that was in existence now almost 10 years ago. Next year will be the 10th anniversary of us going from the 16 digits up to from 16 divisions up to 50 divisions. Hard to believe that it's already been 10 years, but yeah. There was a user guide that was also put, an application guide is in the front of the book, and talks about if there isn't a number, how you as a manufacturer or I as a project specifier can user define a number. The master format police don't come after anybody, but certainly, and we'll be talking more about the CDR program, that is going to be one of those things that we're looking at, is have you aligned your identification, your number and title with master format. Mike?
Yeah, I really want to underscore Nina's point about when I run into a guide spec that's still running off the old 5-digit numbering system, that's immediately a red flag for me that there's a good chance that that material's not up to date. So tip number one is we really encourage you to make sure that you're updating your guide specifications with the correct numbers and titles. Let's go on to tip two.
When we talk about, while master format organizes the sections in a project manual, so that always items in, windows are going to always be in Division 8. There are two other, probably a little bit lesser known formats, which are page format and section format. And all three of these are consensus between CSC, which is the Canadian Specification, now I messed that one up, Construction Specifications Canada. There we go. Boy, that one caught me. But anyway, it's a combined effort between CSC and CSI to provide these formats. And section format is what really basically tells you where things need to go within an individual section. So, and it is what's often heard as being called the CSI format or three-part format. So those are almost synonyms, but section format is the document that really discusses where things belong in each of those. It provides a list of recommended article titles. And so that, and recently, and I want to say that the most current version of section format was an update that was completed in 2008, 2007, somewhere in that time frame. And there were some changes. And again, that's one of those things that the CDR team review will look at to see is if you're utilizing and make sure that information is put into the correct part, be it execution, be it products, or be it general, as you want to make sure that you're putting the information into the correct location. Page format is really about the format of each individual specification section. And while it probably isn't going to be critical that your margins are exactly 0.82 or 0.25 or whatever, having the correct information, good information in the header and footer, and how that information should be included in a specification is really where those guidelines from page format come from.
Yeah, and there, like Nina said, there were some significant changes between the prior version of section format. One just simple example is we used to always have something called system description in part 1, but now that's been moved to part 3. So again, one of those things that we look for as architects and specifiers when we're looking at a guide specification is all the information in the right place. That gives us a real good idea if it's up to date. Let's go to tip 3.
Actually, Mike, we had an interesting comment on Twitter.
Oh.
In my opinion, specifiers really dislike having to rewrite manufacturer specs, is what Sharice Schachter just tweeted. And I was thinking, this isn't a matter of like, is it? Why are you guys so anxious about these things being in the right format?
Well, I think that it's really quite simple. It comes down to a quality control, quality assurance process. Being able to find the critical information in the right place. It's consistency. The reason why we have formats and master format, section format, besides the fact that we're all a bunch of anal whatever, is the fact that I need to be able to find the same information in the same place consistently. And so it has a huge value in from not only quality control, but just from a procedural point of view. If I know where something is supposed to be and I go, it's not there, my initial assumption is it was left out or it wasn't important and so it wasn't added. Does that make sense? Nina, what do you think?
Well, and I certainly agree, and I want to impress upon our listeners today is that we're all professionals. You're a professional at what you do, and I'm a professional at what I do. And there are a lot of professionals out there that are clerical specialists, and they type for a living, and that's what they do, and you couldn't pay me. There's not enough money in the world to pay me to do that on a day in and day out basis. My time is more appropriately spent determining if your product is appropriate for inclusion in this project rather than retyping and reformatting and relaying out your specification. So my time is much more valuable than having to retype and reorganize. So ultimately, when it comes down to it, if I'm at 3 o'clock in the morning having to research a product,
let's keep on. Let's talk about the editor and specifier notes. I think that was a
it's a good segue into that. You're absolutely right. Oftentimes, if I have a guide specification that's been formatted utilizes the format, and then also has provided some editor and specifier notes for me, I know how to appropriately address and edit this specification section. And giving me guidance, while a lot of manufacturer guide specs throw in everything in the kitchen sink, sometimes connecting the dots is not always there, and I may not be able to make that. So we really, really help us make the right decision when there are options, and a lot of times there are options.
Oh yeah, I think that's the other thing too that I have some of the biggest problems with on manufacturers' guide specifications is the tendency to want to put all the features and benefits of a particular product or system into the specification. Not interested in features and benefits. What I need as a specifier is the key technical industry standard information that is appropriate for that particular product or system. Now, it doesn't mean that a feature or benefit might be one of those things, but I don't want marketing or sales information in the guide spec. The place to put that is in the editing notes, in the specifier notes. So if you want to tell me that your product is more competitive for a certain reason or does something better than your competition does, that's fine, but it's not a specification issue. It's a specifier note issue. It's information that you can offer to me, but it's not stuff I want showing up in my specifications. So I think that's one of the reasons why this program that we're talking to you about today is so important, is that we really look for that. We want good technical information in the specifications, and we want you to use the editor and specifier notes, as Nina said, to help us with making choices, how to appropriately use it, but also if there are some key competitive information that we should be aware of, that's the place to put it.
Just a minute longer on this whole
Yes.
issue. So often we will hear from subcontractors and contractors of, well, you know, you can't have this option with that option, and we, you know, they look at us and go, well, aren't you, you know, you're kind of stupid because you've got these options mixed up. Because of the volume of different products and divisions in which a project specifier is required to be knowledgeable, there is absolutely no way that we can know it all. And so that's an area where those editor notes help me stay out of trouble and not mix and match things that don't belong together if you've included them in the same guide spec. Now, does that necessarily mean that every guide spec should be just so dumbed down to one point or one product? Probably not, because sometimes it's much easier to look at that guide spec and evaluate what I do need if it's all right there for me. So give me good guidance. It's really, really important. And it will ultimately help once the project goes out onto the street. It makes things a lot less conflicting. It's just a real good thing.
Right. As an example of that, you know, I'm licensed in several states to make mistakes. I'm very good at making mistakes. I don't need any help making mistakes. So one of the things that I really like to see in a specification, in a guide specification, are limitations. Tell me where not to use this product. Okay? If there are some key issues, installation, coordination, some of those kinds of things, those are great things to put in notes, and they're not negative. Just, you know, every product has limitations. Every system has a place where it probably shouldn't be used. The editor and specifier notes is the place to put that kind of stuff. When I see that level of information in a guide specification, I have a pretty good sense I'm working with somebody who is a real industry player, and that's really critical for all of us. Let's go on to tip 4.
Reference standards, one of my favorites. When Michael and I were talking about this earlier this week, we kind of got to laughing because we've seen guide specifications that have provided pages and pages and pages of reference standards that have really very little to do with the product itself. And so one of the things that we want to make sure is that don't just include a list of reference standards because it makes it look like your product does more or conforms to a bunch of things. You want to make sure that you've given me the title. If you're going to include reference standards, and we can have arguments over whether you should include reference standards in the body or whether it's a list in Part 1, there's a number of ways to do it. There's a number of ways to do it correctly. One size doesn't fit all. But ultimately, there should be some reason for including that reference standard. And you also want to, the practice guides, the CSI construction or the project delivery practice guide talks about how you want to include the date of the reference standard. Oftentimes, and this is kind of one of those things where it goes back to a how current is the information. If I see somebody that's using a 1970 reference standard, that's an automatic red flag for me.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. The critical issue, and as Nina said, we can argue about where you list them or whether you list them or whether you put them in the body of the specification, but do not include reference standards just willy-nilly. If there is not a direct connection in the specification to that reference standard, you probably shouldn't be listing it. And again, this note here about if you're going to have dates or just going to refer to the most current edition, that information belongs in Division 1 in the quality control section about references. Let's move on to tip. Oh, go ahead.
I'm going to back up just for one real quick minute. And when we're talking about reference standards, just to make sure that everybody's on the same page, we're talking about ANSI references, ASTM references, Door Hardware Institute references, things like that. That's what we're classifying as a reference standard. If you're referring to another industry consensus reference standard is what we're talking about when we say reference standards, just in case there was some confusion.
All right, very good. Let's go on to tip 4. I think this is really critical, and Nina's going to have a comment about the correct part, but you know, the standard, CSI standard, is to conform to the 4 C's, to be clear, concise, complete, and correct. And we're going to talk about a few other things in the subsequent tips that will speak to some of this. But, you know, making sure that you give us just the information that we need, not a bunch of extra sort of superficial kind of information. And that's where sometimes the marketing and sales people get mixed up with stuff, is they have this sense that they want to tell us everything about the product or the system in the specification. That's not what a specification is for. That's what marketing literature is for, and product data sheets and those kinds of things. So you want to be clear, you want to be concise, and hopefully as complete as possible, because you got to remember, if you're willing to accept a responsibility to the specifiers that are going to use your materials, we need a complete spec. We need to know everything that is going on and is critical and applies to your system. And on top of that, we also need to know, how does your system integrate into a building? Are there coordination issues with other products and other systems and those kinds of things? So that's what we're really talking there about, complete. And Nina, what was your comment again on correct?
Well, when we talk about correct, there's a couple of issues here, because from a standpoint of, you need to make sure that your manufacturer guide spec is correct for what you are trying to present. You know, don't overstate this. Just the facts, ma'am, is definitely a good clear suggestion here, but it needs to be correct for what your product does. And but when we start looking at the CDR program, and there's been a lot of discussion on this, is, well, and you can go to some of the forums and read comments, is, well, how do you know it's going to be, you know, CSI is approving this. This program is not an approval, and the CDR program does not say this is the correct product to put into a specific project. That's the design professional that's editing these specifications. That's their job. So you, from a standpoint of a manufacturer, need to make sure that the information that you have provided us is, and to add in a couple more C's, but this lands itself right back into the correctness, is it needs to be current. And that's probably the biggest issue with correct for you, is that you've given me current information. You've given me the current test results and reports that as references to those. So from a standpoint of that, correct is one thing from the manufacturer's guide standpoint, and then from the design standpoint, I have to decide if it's correct to use in my project.
All right, very good. Tip number 6 is good writing style. Avoid ambiguous words. This may seem a little nitpicky, but some of the examples we've given here, my favorite is all. All is not a word. All does not belong anywhere in the specifications. There's a certain level of comfort that we have, and there's an example coming up here about painting doors. You know, paint all the doors, paint doors. You don't need all. And to a certain extent, specifiers get themselves in trouble because they're always leaving all the articles out. I'm not ever putting the A's and the does and some of those things in. But, you know, the problem with words like any, and, or, they are ambiguous. They can mean many things to many different people. Nina, have you got a good example of how one of these words could be used that would be help us a little bit with this notion of ambiguous?
Well, I didn't tell you. Well, I was going to say you did actually. I did until you mentioned till you pointed to me. The one that we were discussing, and obviously you've forgotten about the one that we were discussing as well yesterday, but all is definitely one of those ambiguous words, and it allows choice. And oftentimes you will find that those are, you're going to do all or always. That's another good ambiguous word, is always do this. I'm struggling to come up with a good sample at the moment.
Well, I think any is probably another one. I've seen statements like, any system mentioned has to have something done to it or something. It's just really, it's not clear. It's not ambiguous. Or it is ambiguous. And so again, back to the 4 C's, we want to be clear and concise as we possibly can. So let's move on to tip 7.
Actually, Mike, we have a question.
Yeah. Go.
Are manufacturer specs generally proprietary, and if so, is that indicated in the spec notes, asks Susan. Designers working in public sector need to know. Proprietary is not usually allowed.
Yeah, I mean, I think, Nina can speak to this also, but I would expect a manufacturer's guide spec to be proprietary. I have seen some manufacturers actually list their favorite competitors, the people that they know provide products that they consider to be equal. But no, I would expect that a manufacturer's guide spec would be proprietary. And it's an interesting point because, when I go to look at a manufacturer's guide spec, I'm basically looking for product information, number one. How do I include this particular product into my specification if I haven't used it before? But I'm also very interested.
And we may have lost Michael, so I'll just put
about
there he is. Mike, you dropped out for a moment.
What's the matter?
Back up your thought. You dropped out for a moment. You were right in the middle of something important, of course.
Yeah. Well, when I look at a guide spec, there's several things I'm looking for. One, is there anything in part 1 that has some kind of procedural or critical thing that I need to know about? I have to meet a certain standard, there's a certain code issue or something like that. In part 2, I'm basically looking for how to specify the product if I'm not familiar with it, and that's probably mostly why I go to a manufacturer's guide spec. Part 3, I'm very interested, are there any critical preparation things? We do not have product failures in this business. They just don't happen. What we have is installation failures and preparation failures where we didn't do the right things. Like, for instance, we're going to use a stair nosing that has to be cast into concrete, and nobody knew that. Nobody coordinated that. So I think that's one of the key things that I'm looking for. Nina?
Well, going back to the question of proprietary, is putting the information into either a heading paragraph or somewhere indicating from the manufacturer that this is proprietary. I, like Michael, agree that usually I assume that it's proprietary. I don't want to, and there are those that manufacturers who have unfortunately elected to be a little bit sneaky about putting items in that tilt the specification to their benefit. And there is probably nothing more, okay, there are probably a couple of things, but there are a few things that really torque off a specifier more than finding out 3/4 of the way through the bid process that, oops, I've got a mistake in my specification, or I've got something that somebody put in, and so no longer is this a descriptive a descriptive specification. It really is proprietary, but there's just this one little item that has thrown it in that direction. So if you're going to do that in your manufacturer's guide specs, and this is one of the things that when we're working with manufacturers, is we talk with them. It's sure, if you want to provide good competition is good for all of us. If you want to indicate who your other competitors, who do you want to be listed with? Great, that's wonderful. If you want this to be proprietary, that's fine too, but don't try to hide how it's written. Again, most of the specifiers are going to use it as a tool and as just what its first name is, as a guide. But there are those that are going to just drop it into their project manuals that are not educated specifiers or design professionals and are just going to take it off the website. Steal was a bad word. Take it off the website, drop it into their project manual, and never even edit it to make it project specific. We see that a lot. It's unfortunate, and it's the kind of thing that gets them into trouble. So there's nothing wrong with them being proprietary. There's nothing wrong with that at all. You're trying to use this as a tool for quote-unquote selling your product. So hopefully we answered that question.
Good question. Tip 7. Again, looking at trying to make specifications as concise as possible, we want to eliminate the use of words like shall and will. Really important to look at the two concepts of an imperative sentence structure or the streamlining method. And it's really not an or here. We really want both of these in the guide specifications. So the example, of course, contractor shall paint all the doors, which I was alluding to. The only thing you need to say is paint doors. It doesn't always quite feel right because you feel like, well, I said paint all the doors, but all is ambiguous. And what do you mean by all? If you just say paint doors, there's no question about it. If it's a door, it gets painted. So Nina, what about this streamlining down here?
Well, and as we have discussed, is we didn't really lose any words between the imperative mood and the streamline method, but we both like to use the streamline method because it basically, when you're reading down a specification and you see that in your part 3 adhesive, okay, I know I'm going to do something with the adhesive. It puts that first word right out there, and then it tells me how to apply that adhesive. I'm also a fan of the imperative mood. Probably we try to use streamline as much as possible just because it is quite a bit cleaner. But what I always remind people when they're writing specifications is it's good to start with a verb when you're dealing with an imperative sentence structure. And so I know immediately I'm going to apply, or I'm going to paint, or I'm going to seal something. It's having that verb there is always a good. It's an action item, and construction is an active process. And ultimately, construction specifications are addressed to the prime contractor. They're not, you don't need to tell me that the subcontractor is going to do it. That's the contractor's job, is to decide who's going to paint the doors or who's going to apply the adhesive. So, what's the action that's really going to be being taken care of? Backing up to the shall and will, we see a lot of those, and there seems to be a lot more trying to nitpick, and I've got plenty of gray hairs in my head to split whether it's should or shall or will, and one is possibly an option. So they're just good words to kind of steer clear of, because it doesn't make the specification as clean and as clear as it possibly could be.
Yeah, it's the notion of like, just say, provide something, install something, those kinds of things. They're action terms that are very non-ambiguous, if you will. All right, good. Let's go on to tip number 8. We're almost there.
Well, with the technology that we're using, so often if you put a symbol in, depending upon what font is being used and things like that. You turn it into a PDF, or sometimes printers. I've seen whole project manuals come out and be completely illegible because of the incorporation of either strange fonts or symbols, and it's unreadable because I just end up with blobs and boxes, and it kind of, you know, the and I don't even know what they're called, but when you put the little smiley faces on, things like that, it's either looks like that throughout the entire project manual, or it looks like somebody's cussed all over it and then put the symbols for cussing all over my specifications, and that's not pretty at all.
No, and one of the good examples, Nina, of symbols is the degree symbol. If we often in our specifications under field conditions or storage and delivery will say that a product or system has to be stored within a certain temperature range. And what can happen is trying to use that little symbol for degrees can really mess things up. It's a pain to have to spell out degrees, but especially in a guide specification, you don't want any ambiguity. So I always recommend not to use a symbol for temperature degrees, but to actually spell out the word degrees.
On the similar, rather than just going on and putting DEG, especially for guide specifications, it's really, really appreciated if you go on and don't use abbreviations, at least as far as I'm concerned. Michael and I had a discussion about the fact that he said, well, but if they're industry standards, then it's probably okay. Well, in our firm, we work with probably 100 different architects, and they all abbreviate things different ways. And so ultimately, if you don't put an abbreviation in your guide specification, that's one less coordination item that I have to worry about. Even if they're a common abbreviation, PSI was one of the ones. You know, some people use PSI for pounds per square inch. Some people use P/SF. So it just makes it, again, it avoids the potential of conflict. So it's better if you just avoid abbreviations altogether. And Michael, do you have anything else to add on that one?
Just one other thing is I recently did a review of a very large project. And one of the things that came up was every single discipline, the architect, the structural engineer, all of the consulting engineers, all had different abbreviations. None of their abbreviations were consistent. And we all run into this a lot. But it's just really to underscore Nina's point that probably best practice is to minimize or not use abbreviations in your guide specifications. Let the design professionals figure out what they want to do. Let's go on to tip number 9.
Engage a CCS. I think that's, and for those of you that aren't familiar with CCS, it's Certified Construction Specifier. Both Michael and I have taken that exam, passed that exam, continually do our continuing ed for that exam. And it just is a designation of someone that's gone above and beyond, that this is really an area of specialization that they know about. And so engaging a CCS to prepare your guide specifications is a great way to at least get you a good start on it. They talk the language that the project specifiers use and know the best practices in which to perform and prepare your guide specification. So even if you've got a specification, you know, it never hurts to have them look over it. We're going to be talking about the compliance document program here in a minute and going from there. Definitely you can find a certified specifier through CSInet.org/certified. Great way to locate a list of those that are in your area or that maybe have a specialization and can talk not only, you know, you're going to know as a manufacturer, you know your product more than I ever will. But together we can make the best guide specification to use for the industry. And it's really what it needs to be about, is improving the industry.
Yeah, I think it's really important. This is less of a sort of blatant advertisement for, you know, CSI certified kind of people, but so often, you know, we're faced with guide specifications that somebody in the marketing department put together, and you know, we have to wade through a lot of extraneous material that doesn't need to be in there, and someone who has, you know, made specifications a significant part of their career, and it's what they do, isn't going to go there. So as Nina said, you know, and our recommendation is to find someone who's really conversant with specifications. Someone, obviously it's great to find somebody who actually does guide specifications, and just as a matter of comfort and quality, if that person happens to be a CCS, then you can really count on them to do the job for you. Let's go to our last tip, number 10.
Before we
Yes.
get there, though, I'm sorry, that's okay. We're good to stay where we are. On a similar note, for those of you that aren't familiar, there is a correlating program for product reps, and I oftentimes look to find a CCPR, which is a Certified Construction Product Representative, and I know that there's been a big push through CSI. So if you're not familiar with that program, not familiar with the CDT, which is the Construction Document Technology Program, which gives a baseline knowledge for how construction documents should be put together, I really encourage you to look into that information through CSI as well.
Yeah, it's a great point, Nina. I'm always looking. When a product rep walks into my office and hands me a business card, and I see CSI or CDT or CCPR after their name, it really indicates to me right off the top that this is an industry player, somebody who knows what's going on, is familiar with the industry at a similar level that I am, and it's very, very important. Tip number 10, using your guide specification as a tool.
Guide specs are not going to sell your product. Ultimately, they are really a tool, and this is really Michael's forte in encouraging and showing you as manufacturers the benefits of a guide specification.
Yeah, while a guide specification is a significant sales tool, it's not what it's ultimately designed for. Is we said on the left there, the guide specification is a great education tool. I really consider marketing and education to be very similar things. When I was selling wood doors back in 2000, I had no product marketing stuff. I had no product literature. I didn't really have anything. All I had was a guide spec. And I actually did lunch and learns just with my guide spec, and was really quite successful with that. So it also really helps us as specifiers and design professionals if, as a product rep, can walk in and really, you know, deal with basic specification issues with us. And talking over their guide spec as a tool. I mean, one of the things that just amazed me, of the hundreds of lunch and learns that I've sat through in my career, almost never, it feels like, but rarely, does anybody talk about specifications or talk about guide specifications. Yet, why are you in my office? Why are you talking to me? You want to get your product specified. So, if you want to be successful getting specified and educating the design professionals, you got to have a good guide spec, and really, that's what these 10 tips have been about. And also, we'll segue into our next little piece about the CDR program. But Nina, what do you think? What else you got on this one?
I think you've really pretty much hit the nail on the head. The thing that I think we have not talked about is in the second item on the right side of the slide, we talked about correctly including your product. Michael really talks more about how you're wanting to integrate. You're not just wanting to get it included into the project special. It's how we go about integrating that so that we've got a symbiotic building, we've got a symbiotic facility, or whatever the work result is. It's including is kind of a, I look at that word a lot differently now after having worked with Michael on this. It really is more about integration because you want to be part of the project. You don't want to just be something that's slapped on a wall.
Yeah, I think that's really important. It's one of the key things if you find yourself in the process of substituting. Good guide specification can really help you be successful in the process of doing a substitution. So, having said that, that's our those are kind of our top 10 list on guide specifications.
Well, one of the programs that CSI has established, and we're going to kind of swing through these pretty quickly, is called the Compliant Document Program. And it was really developed because a lot of specifiers are really, really disgusted. And in our office, we have the crappy spec file, manufacturers with crappy spec files. And I'm not going to call anybody out because that doesn't do anybody any good. But there's an awful lot of specs out there that are called CSI format specs that are barely even data sheets, you know, and we all get information in different ways. But this program was developed through the CSI Technical Committee to really kind of try to set the standard and encourage manufacturers to provide guide specifications and documents in compliance with the standards and formats. So we've talked about master format, section format, using good specifications language. This program is not, and we touched on it briefly, is not going to tell anybody that CSI is approving your product. That's not what it's about at all. It really is just trying to get the formats and the language right. So it's not going to say CSI has approved my product. That's a misnomer. You need the program because it helps you provide good guide specifications. I need the program as a design professional because it gives me better quality. A lot of people are looking for, or starting to look for, as the program gets more traction, it ends up really helping me to say, okay, this has been a specification that has been put together. I can rely on that it's organized properly. And we talked about that a little bit earlier. So how does it work? And we're going to sneak through these really pretty quickly if we can go on and go to the next slide. The first stage I'm going to go on and talk is that basically there's an agreement between CSI and the manufacturer. There's a certain number of specifications will be reviewed for a set fee. Rob, do you have anything that you want to add on to this? Or Matt, either one of you?
No, I mean, if anyone has any specific questions about that, they're free to reach out to me, of course, absolutely.
And Rob's a real good guy. I've been working with Rob from the beginning of this program, and you know, if one of us doesn't have the answer, we go from there and get an answer, or we make it up. And that's really a good way to do it. But we've got a number of reviewers. Let's go on and go to the next slide. So you basically, there's an agreement process. CSI then has a CDR review panel. We've got a number of us, I think there's about 8 or 9 that are doing reviews. They are all certified construction specifiers. The first time one of the new reviewers reviews a specification section, they are shadowed by a reviewer that's been on the panel for a while, just to make sure that we're all uniformly, because as Michael referred to us earlier, we can all be a little bit, I think anal was the word. No, that wasn't it. Thank you. But really, we can wordsmith things to death, and that's not the purpose of this program. There's a lot of different ways to write a good guide specification. We're looking for a uniform level of quality that is going to come out of this program. Now, because a lot of activities for CSI are volunteer, one of the big things is the reviewer does receive a small stipend for their work, which also encourages it to be performed in a timely manner, so that you're getting, you know, it doesn't just go, because we all know how volunteer work can be. It can get shoved to the back end of a of the stove really pretty rapidly when you've got a paying client. So in order to make sure that this is done professionally and done well, they do receive a small stipend, but a reviewer cannot review their own section. Let's go on and go to the next one. So then the document is reviewed for conformance, and with that being said, I'm not sure that the checklist, there is a checklist that the reviewers use, but that will be, if it is not available on the CSINet website right now, it will be soon. I encourage anybody that's interested in participating in this program or just wants to kind of do a self-review of your guide specs, download that checklist and go through it. If you've got any questions, contact Rob, and he will make sure to get you the information. And usually the timeline is pretty short. I want to say that the first review has to be done within 15 to 20 days of receipt of the document. It usually doesn't take that long. Let's go on and go to the next slide. And that's a good one to stop on right there, because then at that point, once the review is complete, the document is either marked for approval or it's not approved. And I don't know that we've had any that have gone through on the first round, and you say, well, yeah, but the re-review is at no additional cost, because our goal is to get more and more of these that actually are approved. So the re-review, there's a series of re-reviews that are available. If the manufacturer has questions, they can set up a conference call through Rob with the reviewer to understand and get a better guidance on what needs to be changed. The reviewers have been really, really good about providing good direction and suggestions, and if you ultimately really disagree with what they're doing, or you have a reason for what the way that your specification was written that they are taking exception to, the reviewer is taking exception to, there's the ability to talk. It's, none of this stuff is completely black and white, but then you have the ability to talk about it. And ultimately, we've never gone this far, but if the reviewer and the manufacturer really can't come to an agreement on getting this section approved, the section document approved, then it can actually be referred back up to the CSI Technical Committee. We haven't needed to go that far at this point. I don't foresee it happening, because I think in general, as soon as the conference call takes place, there's good meeting of the minds. Michael, you've been involved in some of those conference calls?
Yeah, I've had several. They've been very positive. Kind of go back and forth. Interestingly, on one project that I worked on, it was the technical people back at the manufacturer that was insisting that certain things be left into the guide spec. And, I had to pretty forcefully make the case that that's not where they belong. They really belonged in the product literature as supporting materials. And, once we kind of made the case and explained how things were supposed to work, then it all came together. So the ability to conference with the reviewer and with Rob is very positive, and we resolved a number of fairly significant issues by just talking about it. So there's always an opportunity to chat about the reviews once you receive them.
Folks, we have a question.
Super.
And this one is coming from Twitter. What's the difference between CSI's compliant document review program and what ARCOM does with a paid master spec? ARCOM comes from AIA?
No, I can speak to that. ARCOM makes what they call product master specs. ARCOM, which used to be AIA, it's now an independent corporation, they're the publishers of Master Spec, one of the national master specifications. They have a service where they will provide for a manufacturer what they call a product master spec. And they write the master spec and they publish it. But they do it kind of to their own, they're almost, probably 99% compliant with CSI formats and requirements, but they're two completely different things. What we're looking here in the CDR program is to take a master guide specification that a manufacturer's done and help them ensure that it is complying with all of the CSI formats and requirements. So really two completely different things.
Let's go on to the next slide if we can. Hopefully that answered that question. Thanks, Michael. The logo that you're seeing in front of you is what, once the document has been approved, this is the logo that is issued by CSI that can be used for this guide specification. This is really basically once the manufacturers had their guide spec reviewed, approved for they're able to use this logo for, I believe it's up to 3 years, as long as there are no major changes. And there's always been a discussion on what qualifies as a major change versus a minor change, and that's something that can be worked out through CSI. But generally, you'll be able to use this logo on that specific specification. Now, this is only for the specification that has been reviewed. So if you end up, if you've got 20 specifications and you only have one reviewed, this logo is only able to be applied to that one specification. Hopefully it will up the level of all your specifications and they'll all ultimately be compliant because you'll understand the program a lot better. You'll be really understanding how CSI specifiers, how CSI has designated this good specifications are written and what a CCS is going to be looking for.
Well, first of all, I want to thank our speakers today. Nina and Mike always make things fun. And then I also want to thank the tweeters who've been very active today, particularly Eric and Charisse, who have just kept things hopping. Our next webinar in this series for product representatives will be November 15th, and we will be joined by Andy McIntyre and David Vaughn. You'll note that they are CDT and CCPR, which Nina and Mike talked about earlier, how much they value those kind of product representatives. Nina, you actually know both of them, don't you?
Yes, I do. Yes, I do. Yeah. Both great guys.
So we hope you'll tune in for that. If you would like to register for that webinar, you can go to CSInet.org/trustedadvisor and scroll down a little bit. And then if you are not a member of CSI, it's a free webinar for CSI members and for members of CSI's Product Representation Practice Group. So if you are a member of the practice group but not of CSI, just instead of your CSI number, use the code PRPG member. That's PRPG member. We also wanted to let everyone know that the content you had today is the kind of content that we use when we are building our in-person events for product representatives, which include the upcoming CSI Academies. One of the tracks at the Academies is the Product Representative Academy. And we'll also have our new Trusted Advisors Workshop, and that'll be out your way, Mike, actually. That'll be in Denver. We haven't done it before, but it'll be David Vaughn will be leading that one. So we hope you'll be able to join us for some of those events and definitely for next month's webinar. If you have any questions about anything you've heard today, you can contact us, and obviously we're on Twitter. I am at CSIConstruction there, but you can email me directly at jdavis@csInet.org, or you can email Rob at rholson@csInet.org, and if you can't remember that, just email CSI@csInet.org and it'll get to us, believe me. Did you guys have anything else you wanted to add?
No, we appreciate everybody being a part of this program. Hope it was helpful. Bye, everyone.